Have you ever hated another person? I have for a while, and it's a terrible place to be. Hatred is a very strong word, and I don't use it lightly. Hatred has been rare in my life, thank God, but it's come up when some person, for whatever reason, malice or stupidity or mental illness or whatever, has tried to undermine me and tried to threaten my livelihood, my family, and so on. Howard Thurman wrote Jesus and the Disinherited in 1949. In his chapter on hate, he begins by saying, "Hate is another of the hounds of hell that dog the footsteps of the disinherited in season and out of season. He abhors platitudes and preachments about hate, dismissing them as sentimental. He believes that hatred can arise from contact without fellowship, and that modern life is so impersonal that there is always opportunity for the seeds of hatred to grow unmolested." True today as it was in 1949. His analysis looks at hatred both from the position of the one with power and from the position of the disinherited. And he concludes that despite all of the positive psychological attributes of hatred, hatred finally destroys the core of the life of the hater. James Allison, the theologian who will be with us at the end of March, mark your calendars, in one of his essays remembers the story of a United States senator with a vehemently anti-gay legislative agenda who was arrested in 2007 for attempting to solicit a male undercover police officer. And for a gay man of the time, the senator was very much an enemy. But Allison writes that he found himself rejoicing at his enemy's downfall. That is, until he read a blog piece that pointed out that this particular senator had been born in rural Ohio in 1945. And when he was only 10 years old, there was a sex scandal in Boise, major scandal involving influential citizens and so on. And Allison imagines the impact of that on a 10-year-old boy who earnestly wanted to be good, and for whom it was very clear that gay, or whatever they called it, was not good. Allison posits that the senator may have been locked into a form of denial and self-hatred which could then perpetuate itself for many years thereafter. He then recalled his own experience of finding himself in the 1970s, fast forward a generation. He found himself impossibly riven between the growing knowledge of who he was and the cultural imperative that he not be that thing. James really very nearly made the decision to suppress who he knew himself to be in favor of what he thought was being good and fitting in and so on. And so what he found himself after reading this blog piece, found himself with a kind of compassion for the senator, a kind of fellow feeling. And by grace, he was empowered to work through Jesus' injunction to love those who hate you and pray for those who persecute you and abuse you. At least he was able to work through it with respect to this senator whom he had never met. Sisters and brothers, we are enjoined by Jesus to love our enemies. Set aside anger, says the psalmist. Doesn't do you any good. But it's not easy, is it? Far from being a call to a kind of superhuman moral effort, just try harder to love your enemies, or an injunction to be a sort of metaphorical doormat, just let them do whatever they want to do, because you don't deserve to be anything different anyway. This is a call, an invitation to us rather to be shaped by liberating grace in the midst of a sinful and broken world, rather than by the do's and don'ts of both enemies and friends. After telling us to love our enemies, he says of our friends, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? It's a call to live as the people we are created to be, as children of God, beloved of God, not beaten about by reactivity to what's going on with others. A theologian called Walter Wink, who's now died, in 1999, right here on the Cathedral Close, was teaching a group of us, and he helped me understand something of this passage. He was actually teaching about the powers and the Sermon on the Mount. But he read Jesus' instructions as a kind of civil disobedience in the face of malignant powers. If someone strikes you you turn the other cheek. And what he's saying is likely you were being struck as an inferior, which meant backhanded. And so you turn the other cheek, and the person has to hit you as an equal. If someone takes your coat, give your shirt also. A debtor would be shamed by having his outer garment held by the courts during the day. And so perhaps Jesus is saying, in fact, it's quite funny. He's saying, take your shirt off too, go naked. In other words, shame the person who's oppressing you, because if they look on your nakedness, they are shamed. Luke doesn't talk about go the extra mile, but the extra mile was a command for a soldier could make you carry his pack for a mile, but not more than that. And so there's almost a picture of you going on the second mile, the soldier running after you, saying, no, you're not allowed to go that far. It's almost funny. It's a claim it's a call to be the person you're supposed to be. So what about give to people who beg from you? Frequently I do give money, but I will at least give acknowledgement of the person in some way. And we all know what kinds of acting out can follow from our telling someone something they don't want to hear. Whatever causes a bad reaction, a strange reaction, a negative reaction, disappointment or malice or mental illness, whatever, treating the other with dignity and not getting hooked by her or his reactivity is an affirmation of common humanity rather than automatically playing into the norms and power differentials of the world. So give to those who beg does not mean give exactly what they ask for necessarily, but it means give humanity and claim your own humanity in that exchange rather than ignoring or getting angry or getting bent out of shape or whatever it is. This is a profound passage calling us to start receiving and living as though we have received abundant grace. One more outcome for us of loving our enemies is that we don't have to be in the thrall of soul-destroying hatred. And this can feel costly, especially when it means foregoing our desire that the other suffer unpleasant consequences for his or her actions and that we get to watch them suffer. Nonetheless, living into our God-given freedom is ultimately so much more liberating than remaining stuck in a world of retribution. If you doubt this, spare a thought for Joseph. Joseph sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. What could be worse? Probably some things, but not for Joseph. Rather than condemning them for their actions, he repaid them with extraordinary generosity. We don't know what his brothers made of this, except that they did as Joseph asked and bore his message to their father. But it's not what he did a version of turning the other cheek. He claimed his own humanity in the face of their cruelty. He did not seek to shame them, but I can well imagine their feeling shame in the middle of all of their other emotions at the discovery that Joseph was not only alive, but thriving and willing to help them. Can you imagine being so freed from resentment at being put down, at being wronged, being humiliated, cheated, or whatever, so freed from resentment that you neutralize that other's power to evade and occupy any emotional real estate in your soul? That's part of what it means to claim the liberating promise of the gospel and beginning to live into what is actually a new creation. In the silence that follows, use it as you will, of course, but perhaps imagine yourself freed from hatred, ousting the offender from occupying your time, attention, and energy. It's really hard to let go of resentment and hurt, but imagine for a moment living without them. Jesus said, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. In silence and in response to the gospel, let us pray.